never thought I'd end up here, typing this with shaking hands in some dingy motel room. This isn't a cry for help. I'm way past that. I just need to tell someone what's happening to me. Maybe if I do, it'll feel less real. Or maybe it'll help someone else avoid the nightmare I'm living. I don't know. I'm scared, man. I'm really fucking scared. It all started about a month ago. I was coming back from a late shift at the diner. The place isn't in the best part of town, but it's a job, you know? I was just walking to my car when I felt a sharp prick on my neck. Before I could turn around, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in this dark, cold room. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose. I was strapped to a metal table, and there were these machines beeping around me. Panic set in, but I couldn't move. My limbs felt like they were filled with lead. I tried to scream, but only a pathetic whimper came out. I remember the cold, clinical voice that cut through the darkness. "Ah, he's awake. Good." My heart pounded in my chest as a figure loomed over me. I couldn't make out his face, just a silhouette against the dim light. "Don't struggle. It'll be over soon," he said, almost soothingly. Then, I felt it. A needle piercing my arm. I wanted to thrash, to fight, but I was paralyzed. I felt my blood being drawn out, the cold fluid replaced with something else. It felt like ice running through my veins. I must have blacked out again because the next thing I remember is waking up in an alley, my head pounding, my arm throbbing with pain. I stumbled home, my mind a foggy mess. I figured it was just a fucked up mugging or something. But then I noticed the mark. On my left arm, just below the elbow, there was a small circular scar. It wasn't a needle mark. It looked almost like a brand. I tried to forget about it, to move on with my life. But weird shit kept happening. I'd find myself waking up in strange places with no memory of how I got there. My phone started acting weird too. I'd get these encrypted messages that I couldn't open, just strings of random numbers and letters. Then, last week, I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, nothing. Just my name scrawled on it in messy handwriting. Inside was a DVD and a note. The note said, "Watch this, alone." My heart sank as I slid the DVD into my laptop. The video was grainy, but I could make out enough. It showed me, strapped to that table again. The timestamp indicated it was filmed just a few days ago. The voice from before narrated, detailing how they had harvested my blood, my DNA. He explained almost casually that my blood was being auctioned off on the dark web. For what? I remember whispering to myself, horror creeping in. The video continued, answering my question in the most fucked up way possible. My blood, my DNA, was part of some sick game. The highest bidder would use it to track me down, to hunt me, and if they caught me, I'd be dead. The voice laughed, a cold mechanical sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Good luck," it said. Since then, I haven't been able to sleep. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to jump out at me. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards makes my heart race. I don't know who these people are or why they're doing this to me. All I know is that I'm a target, a fucking human trophy for some psychopath. I can't go to the police. They wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believe it myself. But I have to do something. I can't just sit here and wait to die. I need to figure out who these people are, why they chose me. I need to find a way to stop them before it's too late. If you're reading this, be careful. Trust no one. They could be anywhere, watching, waiting. If they can get to me, they can get to you too. I've been running on pure adrenaline for days now. It's funny how fear can keep you awake when your body is begging for sleep. I haven't been home since I found that DVD. It feels like a trap, a place where they could easily find me. Instead, I've been hopping from one cheap motel to another, paying in cash, trying to stay off the radar. The paranoia is eating me alive. Every time I hear footsteps behind me, I tense up, ready to bolt. I've stopped using my credit cards, ditched my phone, and started carrying a knife. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. I feel like a hunted animal, always on edge. 3 nights ago, I had another blackout. This time, I woke up in an abandoned warehouse. My head was pounding, and I felt sick to my stomach. My clothes were soaked with sweat. It took me a moment to get my bearings. The place was a mess. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and graffiti-covered walls. I stumbled around, trying to figure out where I was and how I got there. That's when I saw it. Scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood was a message. "You're getting closer." My heart skipped a beat. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I looked around, but there was no one there. Just me and that eerie message. I found a door and stumbled out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face. I had no idea where I was, so I just started walking. Eventually, I found a gas station and asked the attendant for directions. Turns out, I was on the outskirts of town, miles away from the nearest motel. I walked for hours, my mind racing. Who were these people? How were they tracking me? And what did they mean by getting closer? Were they trying to mess with my head, or was I actually getting closer to finding out who they were? When I finally got back to my motel, I collapsed on the bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. My mind kept replaying the events of the past few days. The blackouts, the messages, the constant feeling of being watched. It was like I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. I couldn't keep running forever. I went to a public library and started researching. I dug into the dark web, looking for anything that might give me a clue about who these people were. It wasn't easy. Most of the information was hidden behind layers of encryption and anonymous postings. But I found something. There was a forum, buried deep in the dark web, where people talked about human hunting games. My stomach turned as I read through the posts. It was sick, twisted stuff. People bidding on live human beings, tracking them down, and hunting them like animals. And the worst part? They treated it like a sport. One post stood out. It was from someone claiming to be a former participant in one of these auctions. He described the process in chilling detail. The bidding, the tracking, the hunt. He talked about the fear, the desperation of the hunted. And he mentioned something that caught my eye. A specific brand. A circular scar used to mark the chosen targets. Just like the one on my arm. My hands were shaking as I read on. According to this guy, the only way to escape was to take out the hunters before they took you out. It was a long shot, but it was the only plan I had. I needed to find these bastards and stop them before they found me. I started by tracking down the poster. It wasn't easy. He used multiple aliases and bounced around from one location to another, but I got lucky. I found a clue in one of his posts, a mention of a specific bar in a nearby city. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I packed my bag and headed out, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. If I was going to survive this, I needed to be smart. I needed to be ruthless, because if these people caught me, I knew they wouldn't hesitate to kill me, and I wasn't ready to die yet. As I drove towards the city, my mind raced with possibilities. Who were these hunters? What did they want with me? And how the hell was I going to stop them? I didn't have all the answers, but I was determined to find them. Because this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting back. If you're still reading this, know that I'm not giving up. I'm going to find these monsters and make them pay. And if something happens to me, if they catch me before I catch them, at least someone will know the truth. The drive to the city was the longest few hours of my life. Every car that got too close made my heart race. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced that any moment now, I'd see someone following me. But the road stayed empty, and I made it to the city without incident. The bar was a dive in the worst part of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Perfect for the kind of scum that would be involved in something like this. I walked in, trying to look like I belonged there, but every eye in the place seemed to bore into me. I sat at the bar, ordered a drink, and waited. It didn't take long before I spotted him, the guy from the forum post. He was sitting in a corner booth, hunched over a drink, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I took a deep breath and approached him. "You the one who posted about the auction?" I asked, keeping my voice low. His eyes snapped up to meet mine, wide with fear. "Who the hell are you?" I slid into the booth across from him. Someone who's in deep shit and needs answers. He looked around nervously before nodding. "All right, but we can't talk here. Too many ears." He stood up and motioned for me to follow. We left the bar and walked a few blocks until we reached a rundown motel. He led me to his room and locked the door behind us. "All right, talk," he said, collapsing onto the bed. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," I replied. "Who's behind this? How do I stop them?" He sighed and rubbed his face. "It's a long story. The auctions are run by some seriously messed up people. Rich, powerful, the kind who can make you disappear without a trace. They get off on the hunt, on the fear, and once you're in their sights, it's damn near impossible to get out. But you did, I said. How? I got lucky, he admitted. Found a way to fake my death, but it cost me everything. My family, my life. I can't ever go back. I swallowed hard. I need to stop them. There has to be a way. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. There is. But it's dangerous as hell. You have to go after them, take the fight to them. Find their safe houses, their meeting places, expose them. It's the only way to make them back off. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This was so much bigger than I had imagined. Where do I start? He pulled out a crumpled map from his bag and spread it out on the bed. Here, he said, pointing to several locations marked in red. These are places I've been tracking. Safe houses, auction sites, places they used to hide. If you can get evidence, something solid, you might have a chance. I studied the map, my heart pounding. This was it. My only shot. Thank you, I said, feeling a surge of determination. I won't let them get away with this. He gave me a sad smile. Just be careful, all right? These people don't play fair. They'll come at you with everything they've got. I left the motel, the map clutched in my hand. My mind was racing with plans, strategies. I had a lead, a way to fight back. It was a slim chance, but it was better than waiting to be hunted down. My first stop was one of the safe houses marked on the map. It was an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, my heart pounding in my chest. The place looked deserted, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I slipped inside through a broken window and made my way through the dark, musty building. It was quiet, too quiet. I crept through the shadows, every nerve on edge, until I found a staircase leading down to a basement. The air grew colder as I descended, the smell of damp and decay filling my nose. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a heavy metal door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was filled with monitors, each one displaying a different view of the city. Streets, parks, buildings, places I recognized. And there, in the center of the room, was a chair. Restraints dangling from the arms and legs. It was a control room, a hub for whoever was hunting me. I rifled through the papers and files scattered around, looking for anything that could help. I found lists of names, dates, locations, evidence of their twisted game. I snapped photos with a burner phone I had picked up, my hands shaking. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps above me. They were here. I grabbed the phone and bolted up the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear them coming, their voices low and menacing. I burst out of the warehouse and ran for my life, the sound of pursuit close behind. I barely made it to my car, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I jumped in, started the engine, and peeled out of there, the tires screeching on the pavement. I didn't look back. As I drove, my mind raced. I had evidence now, something to fight back with, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. These people were powerful, and they wouldn't stop until they had me. I needed more. I checked into another motel and locked the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I needed to find a way to expose them, to bring them down for good. The night stretched on, and I could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, but I couldn't rest. Not yet. I had a plan now, a way to fight back. And I was going to use it, no matter what it took. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the people who had been hunted, all the lives that had been destroyed. I was going to make sure these bastards paid for what they had done, one way or another. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. The evidence I had wasn't enough to take them down, but it was a start. I needed more proof, more names, more leverage, and I knew just where to get it. According to the map, there was another safe house on the other side of the city, a place they used to store files and documents. If I could get in there and find something concrete, I might have a chance. I changed my appearance as much as I could, cut my hair, dyed it, swapped my usual clothes for something less noticeable. I had to be smart, had to stay one step ahead. The drive to the second safe house was nerve-wracking. Every car that passed made me flinch. Every pedestrian looked like a potential threat. Paranoia was my constant companion now. The safe house was an old office building, long abandoned and falling apart. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. The front door was locked, but a broken window around the back provided easy access. I slipped inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. The interior was a mess of broken furniture and debris, but it was clear someone had been here recently. I moved through the building carefully, my heart pounding in my chest. The place was eerily quiet, every creak of the floorboards echoing through the empty halls. I found what I was looking for in a back room, a locked filing cabinet, tucked away in a corner. I didn't have the tools to pick the lock, so I used a crowbar I had found in the alley to pry it open. The metal screeched in protest, but eventually it gave way, revealing stacks of folders and papers inside. I rifled through the files, taking photos of anything that looked important. Names, addresses, financial records, it was all there. Enough to start building a case. I was so focused on my task that I almost didn't hear the footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. A man stood in the doorway, his face hidden in shadow. He was holding a gun, and the look in his eyes was pure malice. "Thought you could get away, huh?" he sneered, stepping into the room. "You're not the first to try, and you won't be the last." I backed away, my mind racing. I needed a way out, but he was blocking the only exit. Desperation surged through me, and I lunged at him, swinging the crowbar with all my might. He fired, but the bullet went wide, shattering a window behind me. The crowbar connected with his arm, and he cried out, dropping the gun. I didn't wait for him to recover. I bolted past him, grabbing the gun as I went. I ran through the building, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. I could hear him cursing and struggling to his feet behind me, but I didn't look back. I burst out of the building and into the daylight, the cold air stinging my lungs. I jumped into my car and sped away, my heart racing. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing in the doorway, watching me go. I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. None of them would. They'd come after me with everything they had. I drove for hours, not caring where I was going as long as it was far away from there. Eventually, I ended up in another motel, this one even more run down than the last. I locked the door, barricaded it with a chair, and collapsed on the bed, my body shaking with adrenaline. I spent the rest of the night going through the photos I had taken, piecing together the puzzle. The names, the addresses, it was all connected. These people were part of a larger network, a web of corruption and violence that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. And at the center of it all was a man named Victor Reyes. Reyes was a shadow, a ghost. No photos, no records, just a name whispered in the dark corners of the internet. He was the one pulling the strings, the one who had started the auctions. If I could find him, expose him, maybe I could bring the whole thing crashing down. But it wouldn't be easy. Reyes was powerful, untouchable, and I was just one person, hunted and alone. I needed help, someone who knew the system, who could navigate the dark web and find Reyes for me. I reached out to the only person I could think of, the guy from the bar. It took some doing, but I managed to track him down again. We met in a different dive, this one even shadier than the last. He looked worse than before, gaunt and paranoid, but he agreed to help. Over the next few days, we worked together, piecing together the clues, following the breadcrumbs. It was dangerous work, and I knew we were running out of time. The hunters were closing in, and every move we made put us at greater risk. But we were getting closer. We could feel it. Late one night, as we were holed up in another grimy motel room, we finally found it. A lead, buried deep in the dark web, pointing us to a location. A private estate on the outskirts of the city. It was heavily guarded, nearly impenetrable, but it was our only shot. We made a plan, a desperate last-ditch effort to get inside, to find Reyes and end this once and for all. It was a suicide mission, and we both knew it. But we didn't have a choice. It was now or never. As we prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the end. One way or another, it would all be over soon. I just hoped we could take Reyes down with us, because if we failed, there would be no one left to stop him. The night we decided to strike was eerily quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. We parked a mile away from the estate and made our way through the woods, the darkness swallowing us whole. My heart pounded with every step. my mind racing with the knowledge that this could be the last thing I ever did. But I couldn't turn back now. This had to end. The estate loomed ahead, a massive fortified mansion surrounded by high walls and security cameras. We had planned our approach carefully, avoiding the main entrance and heading for a side gate that seemed less guarded. My companion, who I had come to know as Paul, was a tech wizard. He hacked into the security system, creating a brief window for us to slip through. We moved quickly and silently, sticking to the shadows. The grounds were eerily quiet, but I knew better than to let my guard down. We made our way to a side door, and Paul worked his magic again, bypassing the lock with ease. We slipped inside, the cold, clinical interior a stark contrast to the opulence outside. We navigated the hallways, relying on the blueprints Paul had managed to acquire. The place was a maze, but we had a destination, Reyes's office. We knew that if he was here, that's where he'd be. And, if we were lucky, we'd find the evidence we needed to bring him down. As we approached the office, we heard voices. My heart raced, and we ducked into a nearby room, listening intently. It was Reyes, talking to someone on the phone. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if discussing everyday business rather than the twisted, horrific reality of his operations. I glanced at Paul, and he nodded. This was it. We had to move now. We burst out of the room and into the office, catching Reyes by surprise. He was a tall, imposing figure, but his expression was one of shock and anger. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled, reaching for something on his desk. A gun. I didn't hesitate. I raised my own weapon, the one I had taken from the hunter in the warehouse, and pointed it at him. "Don't move," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Reyes smirked, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" he said, his hand inching closer to the gun. "I know exactly who you are," I replied, "and I have all the evidence I need to bring you down." Paul moved quickly, grabbing the files on the desk and shoving them into a bag. Reyes's smirk faltered as he realized what was happening. "You think you can just walk out of here?" he sneered. "My men will be here any second." I felt a surge of desperation. We were running out of time. I stepped closer, the gun still trained on him. "You're done, Reyes. This sick game of yours is over." But before I could react, the door behind us burst open and a group of armed men stormed in. Reyes's smirk returned, and he lunged for his gun. I fired, the sound deafening in the confined space. Reyes fell back, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. Paul and I turned to face the guards, but they were already upon us. We fought back, but we were outnumbered and outgunned. They overpowered us, knocking the gun from my hand and dragging us to the ground. As they restrained us, Reyes staggered to his feet, his face twisted in rage. "You think you can stop me?" he spat, glaring at us. "You're nothing. Just pawns in a game you'll never understand." The guards dragged us out of the office and down a series of dark, winding corridors. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. But it was no use. They had us. This was it. We were thrown into a basement room, the door slamming shut behind us. The darkness was suffocating, and the air was thick with the smell of damp and decay. I could hear Paul breathing heavily beside me, and I felt a surge of guilt. I had dragged him into this, and now we were both going to die. But then, a flicker of light caught my eye, a small barred window high up on the wall. It wasn't much, but it was something. We had one last chance. "Paul," I whispered, my voice trembling. "The window. We have to try." He nodded, and we scrambled to our feet, working together to reach the window. It was a tight fit, but with Paul's help, I managed to squeeze through. I reached back down, pulling him up and out behind me. We emerged into the cold night air, our bodies battered and bruised, but alive. We ran, not looking back, the sound of our pursuers fading into the distance. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the woods, collapsing against a tree, gasping for breath. It wasn't over. Not yet. But we had the evidence, and we had each other. And as long as we were alive, we had a chance. We spent the next few days in hiding, using Paul's tech skills to upload the evidence to every major news outlet, law enforcement agency, and dark web forum we could find. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Reyes's network started to crumble, and the authorities launched a massive investigation. But we knew it wasn't safe to stick around. Reyes might have been exposed, but his followers were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to silence us. We changed our identities, moved to a different city, and started new lives. I still look over my shoulder, still feel the fear gnawing at me, but I know that we did the right thing. We fought back. We survived. And maybe, just maybe, we made the world a little bit safer. If you're reading this, be careful. The dark web is a place of nightmares, and the people who dwell there are monsters in human skin. But remember, there is always hope. There is always a way to fight back. And as long as you have that, you're never truly lost. I've always been a skeptic. I never believed in all that supernatural nonsense, cults, or rituals. But what happened to me 2 months ago shattered everything I thought I knew about the world. I'm sharing this now because I can't keep it to myself anymore. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there will understand or help me make sense of it. It started on a typical Thursday night. I work late shifts at a local diner, and it was around 1 a.m. when I clocked out. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few drunks stumbling out of bars and the occasional late-night jogger. My car was parked a few blocks away, down a poorly lit side street. I remember feeling uneasy as I walked, but I brushed it off. It was late and I was tired. As I approached my car, I noticed a white van parked a few feet away. It looked like one of those old, sketchy vans you see in crime shows. The windows were tinted, and it had no visible markings. I quickened my pace, feeling a growing sense of dread. Just as I reached for my car door, I felt a sharp pain in my neck. Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up to the sound of muffled voices and the sensation of being jostled around. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry. It took me a few moments to realize I was in the back of the van, my hands and feet bound with rough rope. Panic set in as I struggled against the restraints, but they were too tight. The more I fought, the more the rope dug into my skin. The voices outside grew louder. I could hear snippets of conversation, but nothing made sense. It was a mix of chanting and low murmurs, like some kind of twisted prayer. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was in serious danger. I needed to escape, but how? I scanned the interior of the van. It was empty, save for a few tattered blankets and some metal tools that looked like they hadn't been used in years. The windows were covered with black curtains, blocking any view of the outside world. I tried to peer through a small gap, but all I could see was darkness. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. It was hard to tell. The van finally came to a stop, and the doors swung open. Harsh light flooded in, blinding me temporarily. I felt rough hands grab me and drag me out of the van. I struggled, but it was no use. They were too strong. As my vision cleared, I saw a group of people dressed in long, dark robes standing in a circle. Their faces were hidden by hoods, but I could feel their eyes on me. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, their voices low and rhythmic. It was then that I noticed the symbols etched into the ground beneath me, strange, intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. They dragged me to the center of the circle and forced me to kneel. One of them stepped forward, holding a large, ornate knife. My blood ran cold as I realized what they intended to do. I was going to be a sacrifice. I screamed, pleaded, begged for my life, but it only seemed to excite them. They began chanting louder, their voices rising in a terrifying crescendo. The leader, the one with the knife, started speaking in English, reciting some kind of prayer or incantation. He spoke of summoning an ancient power, of blood binding us to the old gods. The knife glinted in the firelight as he raised it above his head. I braced myself for the end, but at that moment, something inside me snapped. Adrenaline surged through my body, and I managed to wrench one hand free from the ropes. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed a nearby rock and swung it at the leader's head with all my strength. He stumbled back, the knife clattering to the ground. The others hesitated, shocked by my sudden defiance. I took advantage of their surprise and bolted, running as fast as my legs would carry me. I could hear them shouting behind me, their footsteps pounding the earth. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran through the forest, branches whipping against my face, tearing at my clothes. The sounds of pursuit gradually faded, but I didn't dare slow down. I ran until my legs gave out, and I collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath. Eventually, I found my way to a road and flagged down a passing car. The driver, A kind old man took one look at me and called the police. I was safe, but the terror of that night still haunts me. The cult, their chants, the symbols. It's all burned into my memory. The police investigated, but they found nothing. No trace of the van, no signs of the ritual site, nothing. They think I made it up, that it was some kind of trauma-induced hallucination. But I know what happened, I know what I saw, and I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting. The police were convinced it was all in my head, a stress-induced episode, they called it. They filed a report, took my statement, and sent me home with a business card for a local therapist. I tried to convince them to take me seriously, but I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was crazy. So I went home, locked my doors, and tried to piece my life back together. For the next few days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, those hooded figures with their dead, soulless eyes. The memory of their chants echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of how close I'd come to dying. I started drinking to numb the fear, but it only made things worse. The nightmares became more vivid, more intense. One night, about a week after the kidnapping, I woke up to the sound of someone whispering my name. My heart raced as I lay there, straining to hear. The room was dark, shadows dancing on the walls. I thought it was just another nightmare until I felt a cold breath on my neck. I bolted upright, flipping on the bedside lamp. The room was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Lisa. She was the only person who believed me, or at least pretended to. She let me crash on her couch and even took a few days off work to keep me company. But even with Lisa around, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. One afternoon, we decided to get out of the house and grab some lunch. The diner was bustling with people, a welcome distraction from the paranoia that had become my constant companion. We found a booth in the back and ordered burgers. For the first time in days, I started to feel somewhat normal. But then I saw him. One of the hooded figures from that night, sitting at the counter, staring directly at me. My blood ran cold, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. I grabbed Lisa's arm, trying to point him out, but when I looked again, he was gone. Lisa insisted it was just my imagination, but I knew better. They had found me. That night I barely slept, jumping at every little noise. The next morning, Lisa went to work, leaving me alone in her apartment. I tried to distract myself with TV, but I couldn't focus. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, sent me into a panic. Around noon, I heard a knock at the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Nobody knew I was here, except for Lisa. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A man in a delivery uniform stood there, holding a package. My first instinct was to ignore him, but he kept knocking, louder and more insistent. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Delivery for Alex Turner," he said, holding out a clipboard for me to sign. My stomach dropped. Nobody should know my name or where I was staying. "I think you have the wrong address," I stammered, trying to close the door. But he shoved his foot in the gap, preventing me from shutting it. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, menacing stare. "You're coming with us, Alex," he said, grabbing my wrist with a vice-like grip. Panic surged through me, and I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. He pulled me into the hallway, and I saw two more men waiting by the elevator, both dressed in black robes. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, but the hallway was empty. The men dragged me towards the elevator, their grips tightening as I fought against them. Just as they were about to force me inside, the elevator doors opened and Lisa stepped out. Her eyes widened in shock, and she screamed, rushing towards us. She tackled one of the men, giving me a moment to break free. I punched the other in the face and bolted down the hallway, Lisa right behind me. We sprinted down the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the stairwell. I could hear the men chasing us, their heavy breaths and angry shouts growing louder. We burst through the lobby doors and into the street, desperately looking for help. A car screeched to a halt in front of us, and the driver, a middle-aged woman, jumped out. "Get in!" she yelled. Without hesitation, we dove into the back seat, and the woman floored it, speeding away from the apartment building. As we drove, I glanced back and saw the men standing in the middle of the street, watching us. Their faces were twisted in fury, but they made no move to follow. The woman drove for what felt like hours, finally pulling over at a rest stop. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "My name is Sarah," she said, turning to face us. "I know what they are, and I know how to stop them." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way to end this nightmare. Maybe Sarah could help us. But deep down, I knew that the cult wouldn't give up so easily. They wanted me for something terrible, and they wouldn't stop until they had me. Sarah drove us to a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods. It was run down and looked abandoned, but she assured us it was safe. As we entered, I felt a chill run down my spine. The interior was sparse, with only the bare necessities: a small kitchen, a couple of chairs, and a cot in the corner. The windows were boarded up, casting eerie shadows in the dim light. We sat around the small kitchen table, and Sarah began to explain. "I've been tracking this cult for years. They're part of an ancient order that believes in summoning dark powers through human sacrifice. You're not the first they've tried to take." I shuddered, remembering the knife, the chanting, the symbols etched into the ground. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They target people who are emotionally vulnerable, people who can easily disappear without raising too many questions. You fit their criteria, but don't worry. I know how to stop them," Sarah said, her eyes hard with determination. Lisa and I exchanged a glance. We were both terrified, but we had no other options. Sarah was our only hope. "The first thing we need to do is break their connection to you," Sarah continued. "They've marked you, probably with a sigil or a charm. Do you have anything unusual on you?" I shook my head, but then I remembered the small scar on my wrist. It had appeared a few days after my escape, a strange, intricate pattern that I had assumed was a scratch or a rash. I showed it to Sarah, and her face went pale. "That's it," she said, her voice tense. "We need to remove it. Now." She rummaged through her bag and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid and a silver knife. "This will hurt, but it's the only way to sever their link." I braced myself as Sarah poured the liquid onto the knife. It hissed and bubbled, releasing a sharp, acrid smell. She took my wrist and began to cut around the scar. Pain shot through me, but I gritted my teeth and held still. After what felt like an eternity, she removed a small, bloody piece of skin and dropped it into the vial. The liquid inside turned black, and the scar on my wrist slowly faded. "It's done," she said, sealing the vial and placing it back in her bag. "They can't track you now." I sighed with relief, but it was short-lived. A loud bang echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of glass shattering. We all jumped to our feet, hearts pounding. The cult had found us. Sarah grabbed a shotgun from a hidden compartment under the table and handed it to me. "Get to the basement," she ordered. "There's a tunnel that leads to a safe house. Go now." Lisa and I didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted to the basement door, but before we could reach it, the front door burst open, and 3 hooded figures stormed in. Sarah fired a warning shot, but they kept coming, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I swung the shotgun around and fired, hitting one of them in the chest. He fell to the ground, but the other 2 kept advancing. Sarah and I fired again and again, but they seemed unstoppable. One of them grabbed Lisa, and I saw the terror in her eyes as he started dragging her away. "No!" I screamed, rushing forward and tackling the man. We hit the ground hard, and I wrestled the knife from his hand, plunging it into his side. He let out a gurgling scream and went limp. "Alex, come on!" Sarah shouted, pulling me to my feet. We grabbed Lisa and ran to the basement, slamming the door behind us. The tunnel entrance was hidden under a loose floorboard, and we scrambled inside, crawling through the dark, narrow passage. The sound of footsteps above us grew louder, and I knew we didn't have much time. We crawled faster, our hands and knees scraping against the rough earth. Finally, we reached the end of the tunnel and emerged into a small clearing in the woods. "There!" Sarah pointed to a dilapidated shed a few yards away. "That's the safe house." We stumbled towards it, adrenaline fueling our desperate flight. Once inside, Sarah bolted the door and collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving. "We can't stay here long," she said, her voice shaking. "They'll find us eventually. We need to keep moving." Lisa and I nodded, too exhausted to speak. We had escaped for now, but the cult was relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had me. As we sat there, catching our breath, I felt a cold, creeping dread settle over me. I glanced at Lisa, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. I knew then that we were in a fight for our lives, and there was no turning back. Sarah stood up, her face set with grim determination. We need to find the heart of their operation and destroy it. It's the only way to end this. I looked at her, feeling a surge of hope mixed with terror. Where do we start? She met my gaze, her eyes filled with resolve. We start by going back to where it all began. We're going to the ritual site. My blood ran cold at the thought, but I knew she was right. If we were going to survive, we had to face the cult head on. And this time, we would be ready. The next morning, we set out at dawn. Sarah had a plan, but it was risky. We needed to go back to the place where they had tried to sacrifice me. She believed there would be clues, something that could lead us to the heart of their operation. We packed supplies, food, water, weapons, and drove in silence, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on us. After hours of driving, we reached the edge of the forest. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. I could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense of dread. We left the car hidden in some bushes and continued on foot, following a barely visible path through the underbrush. The forest grew darker and more oppressive as we walked. The sounds of nocturnal creatures rustling in the undergrowth added to the unnerving atmosphere. My heart pounded with every step, but Sarah's presence gave me strength. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. After what felt like hours, we reached the clearing. The sight of it brought back a flood of memories, the hooded figures, the chanting, the terror of that night. The symbols were still etched into the ground, now partially covered by leaves and debris. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Stay alert." We split up, searching the area for anything that might help us. I moved towards the center of the clearing, where the fire had been. The ground was charred, and the smell of burnt wood lingered in the air. I noticed something glinting in the dirt, and knelt down to pick it up. It was a small silver pendant, shaped like the symbol they had carved into my wrist. I showed it to Sarah, and her eyes widened. "This is it. This is their mark. They use these to bind their victims to their rituals." "What do we do with it?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "We destroy it," Sarah said, pulling out the vial she had used earlier. She poured the remaining liquid onto the pendant, and it sizzled and smoked, disintegrating into ash. That should weaken their hold, but it won't stop them. We need to find their leader. Suddenly we heard a rustling in the trees. We froze, listening. The sound grew closer, and I could see the faint glow of torches moving through the forest. Panic surged through me. They had found us. "We need to move, now," Sarah hissed, grabbing my arm. We sprinted towards the edge of the clearing, ducking into the trees just as the cultists emerged. I could see their hooded figures moving through the clearing, their voices rising in an angry chant. We ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping against our faces. The chanting grew louder, closer. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. We had to get away. I glanced back and saw the cultists gaining on us, their torches bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the darkness. We stumbled into a small cave, hidden behind a thicket of bushes. Sarah motioned for us to be silent, and we crouched in the darkness, trying to catch our breath. The chanting continued outside, growing fainter as the cultists moved past us. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded, and we were left in silence. Sarah peered out of the cave, making sure the coast was clear before motioning for us to follow. We crept out, staying low and moving as quietly as possible. "We need to find their main site," Sarah said, her voice low. "It'll be heavily guarded, but if we can destroy whatever it is they use for their rituals, we might be able to stop them for good." We moved through the forest, avoiding the main paths and sticking to the shadows. After a while, we saw a faint light in the distance, flickering like a beacon in the darkness. We approached cautiously, hiding behind trees and bushes. The sight before us was both horrifying and mesmerizing. A large stone altar stood in the center of a clearing, surrounded by burning torches. Hooded figures moved around it, preparing for some kind of ceremony. In the center of the altar was a large, ornate book, its pages glowing with an unnatural light. "That's it," Sarah whispered. "That's their source of power." "How do we destroy it?" I asked, my voice shaking. Sarah pulled out a small bundle of explosives from her bag. "We plant these around the altar and blow it sky high. But we have to be quick. Once they realize we're here, They'll come after us. We split up, each of us taking a section of the clearing to plant the explosives. My hands trembled as I worked, the fear of being caught making my movements clumsy. I glanced up and saw the cultists moving in a slow, rhythmic dance around the altar, their faces hidden by their hoods. Once the explosives were in place, we regrouped at the edge of the clearing. Sarah held the detonator, her finger hovering over the button. "On my mark," she said, her voice tense. 3, 2, 1. She pressed the button, and the clearing erupted in a deafening explosion. The force of the blast knocked us off our feet, and we scrambled to our feet, running as fast as we could. Behind us, the altar was engulfed in flames, the book consumed by the fire. The cultists screamed in rage, their chants turning into frantic shouts. We ran through the forest, the sounds of the explosion still ringing in our ears. My heart pounded with fear and adrenaline, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had struck a blow against them. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the forest, collapsing in a heap, gasping for breath. Sarah looked at me, a grim smile on her face. "It's not over yet, but we've weakened them. They won't be able to perform their rituals without that book." Lisa nodded, her face pale but determined. "What now?" "Now we find out who their leader is and take them down," Sarah said, her eyes burning with resolve. "This isn't over until they're all stopped." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. The cult had taken so much from me, but now I had a chance to fight back. We would stop them, no matter what it took. After the explosion, we spent a few days hiding in another safe house Sarah had prepared. The cult was on high alert, and we knew they would be searching for us with a vengeance. Sarah had contacts who provided us with information, and through them, we learned the name of their leader, Ezekiel Blackwood. He was an old, wealthy recluse, living in a mansion on the outskirts of town. Sarah believed that taking him down would cripple the cult for good. We planned our attack meticulously. Sarah, Lisa, and I spent hours going over maps, schematics, and potential escape routes. We knew this was our last chance. If we failed, we wouldn't get another. The night we chose was moonless, the darkness an ally in our mission. We parked a mile away from Blackwood's mansion and approached on foot. The estate was surrounded by a high wall, but we found a spot where the security was lightest and climbed over. The grounds were vast, with manicured lawns and dense decorative bushes that provided ample cover. We reached the mansion and crept around to the back. The windows were dark, but we knew better than to assume the place was empty. Sarah had brought along some equipment to disable the alarm system, and within minutes, we had a way in. The interior was opulent, a stark contrast to the dark deeds that took place within. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. We moved through the rooms cautiously, our senses on high alert. Sarah led the way, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. As we approached the grand staircase, we heard voices, low and menacing. We followed the sound to a large ornate door at the end of the hall. Sarah signaled for us to stay back, while she pressed her ear to the door, listening. "They're performing a ritual," she whispered. "We need to stop them now." We burst through the door, weapons drawn. The scene inside was like something out of a nightmare. A group of hooded figures surrounded an altar, on which a young woman lay bound and gagged. Her eyes were wide with terror. At the head of the altar stood Ezekiel Blackwood, his hands raised in invocation. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then all hell broke loose. The cultists turned towards us, their eyes glowing with malevolent energy. Ezekiel snarled, a guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. "Stop them!" he commanded, and the cultists surged forward. We fought with everything we had. Sarah fired her shotgun, taking down 2 cultists in quick succession. Lisa and I swung our knives, desperately trying to hold them off. It was chaos, screams, gunshots, and the sickening sound of blades slicing through flesh. I fought my way towards the altar, determined to save the girl. Ezekiel saw me coming and raised his hand. I felt a force like a sledgehammer hit me, knocking me to the ground. Pain radiated through my body, but I forced myself to stand. I couldn't let him win. I reached the altar and grabbed Ezekiel, tackling him to the ground. We struggled, his strength surprising for someone so old. His eyes burned with hatred, and he muttered incantations under his breath, trying to summon some dark power. But I had the upper hand. I pinned him down and plunged my knife into his chest. Ezekiel let out a strangled cry, his body convulsing. The cultists froze, their connection to their leader severed. I looked around and saw Sarah and Lisa fighting off the remaining few. Without Ezekiel's power, they were no match for us. One by one, they fell, their bodies crumpling to the floor. I turned back to Ezekiel. His eyes were glassy, his breaths shallow. "It's over," I said, my voice shaking. "You're finished." He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "You think this ends with me?" he rasped. "There are others, more than you can imagine. You'll never stop us all." With a final, shuddering breath, Ezekiel went still. I stood up, my legs trembling, and looked around the room. The cultists were dead, their ritual disrupted. The young woman on the altar was sobbing, tears streaming down her face. Lisa hurried over to untie her, murmuring words of comfort. Sarah approached me, her face grim but resolute. "We did it," she said softly. "We stopped them." I nodded, but Ezekiel's words echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. There were more out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to continue their dark rituals. But we had struck a blow tonight, a victory in a long, terrifying battle. We helped the girl to her feet and led her out of the mansion, leaving the bodies of the cultists behind. As we walked into the night, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. We had survived, but the fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But we had each other, and as long as we stood together, we had a chance. In the end, that's all we could hope for. A chance to fight, to survive, and maybe, just maybe, to live without fear.